beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Dr Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The amount of money local government authorities have, such as Surrey County Council and the new East Surrey and West Surrey unitaries, has a huge impact on day-to-day impact on residents. It determines the provision of services, protection of our communities, and is essential to the many businesses and voluntary organisations through both policy and the many direct contacts held with local service providers. We heard again this week claims that the government is boosting funding for councils, but the reality doesn't live up to the rhetoric. Surrey County Council's budget is being reduced by over £50 million for the next financial year, negatively impacting Surrey more than any other area, despite increased demand and escalating costs just to maintain existing service levels. The government's calculations simply do not provide enough money for statutory services such as adult social care provision, and we all know the urgent need for action to improve the special educational needs system and support available for children, schools and families. But instead of investing in services, the government is slashing central grant funding for Surrey. Now, despite this, Surrey County Council have managed to put forward a balanced budget, thanks to the hard work led by Councillor David Lewis. But the situation as it stands is unsustainable and the risks are mounting. The government needs to act. And in addition to the counterproductive funding decisions being made by the government, we have the added complication of local government reform. Changing the structures of local authorities is a complicated matter. It requires changes in contracts, staffing, locations, and every other aspect of running a large and complicated organisation. And yet, we have no information on how this transition will be funded. It cannot possibly come from existing budgets, given the situation outlined above, if services are to be maintained. There's no clarity on what will happen to staff during this transition. Many jobs are at risk. Some have already sought new, more stable opportunities elsewhere. All face additional pressures as a result of reorganisation, and the risk is important decisions will be delayed, leaving Surrey stuck in stasis. And beyond transition, we must look at the foundation of the new unitaries themselves. We all know the concerns over local authority debt. Some councils, such as Runnymede, that covers part of my constituency, a big chunk of my constituency, were able to operate a commercial strategy with sound financial management, meaning the risk of high debt was mitigated by clear controls and revenue provisions. But this is an exception. Too many other local authorities have borrowed heavily without the knowledge or systems to manage the risk, none more disastrously so than Woking. Woking's failures are unparalleled for the size of the authority, both in terms of scale of debt and failure of financial management and scrutiny. Yet despite announcements that the government is proceeding with local government reform, there is still no clear plan what to do with the Woking debt. In October last year, the government announced debt relief, totalling £500 million in 26 and 27 to assist Woking's debt recovery. But this still leaves over £1.5 billion of debt, which, under the government plans, may shortly become the liability of residents across West Surrey.
On that point, I wonder if the gentleman
I pledge to give way to my honourable friend from Surrey Heath.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's giving an excellent speech that I think really draws out the pressures that his residents and mine, and indeed the honourable gentleman for Farnham and Borden face. West Surrey Unitary Authority as a whole faces the prospect of beginning its life on day one with £4.5 billion worth of debt. And the honourable gentleman raised a very important point about the vital public services that need to be paid for. My residents, and I'm sure his are as well, are concerned that when West Surrey comes into existence, those public services could falter and fail on day one. I wonder, through the honourable gentleman, could I ask the Minister what reassurance we can have that that won't happen and that some kind of financial package will be offered to my residents and his?
I thank him for the intervention. I've done a bit of music. It's sounding more like an intervention on the Minister rather than me, but I hope it gives the Minister time to prepare for what I also suspect is an inevitable question that I hope she addresses in the winding up. Very happy to.
Thanks, the honourable gentleman, for giving way. And from Surrey to Staffordshire, there is some concern in my part of the world, in Newcastle and Lyme, about what a potential new unitary may look like and what that impact on the debt that a current council may have, and if a new unitary is formed, that debt's carried over. So I just want to add my concerns to his. This isn't a party political issue. This is about making sure that people are not being forced to take up or pay the bill for debt that others have brought together.
I thank the honourable member opposite from Newcastle and Lyme for his intervention, and he's exactly right. This is an issue that affects all areas when it comes to local government reform, when it comes to debt and other commitments which are in neighbouring authorities. And it actually brings me precisely onto the point I was about to make, which it's really not fair that my constituents in Runnymede could have to pay for the failed decisions of woking politicians, both those in power and those who failed in their duty to scrutinise decisions, all of whom they never got to vote for. The scale of the remaining debt, when combined with other local authorities, means that the new West Surrey unitary will be bankrupt from day one. New local authorities should be established on a sound and equal footing, so provision of services can be determined by local need. The government needs to urgently put forward a sound long-term financial plan for both unitaries, East and West, in Surrey.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Pleasure to give way.
And I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for a very impassioned and powerful speech on this matter, which I wholeheartedly agree. I think he's being somewhat polite by the way he describes what this unitary authority is going to be. Essentially, if it is saddled with the debt from Woking and a number of other boroughs, it will essentially be stillborn from the start. And residents in my areas in Farnham, Hazelmere and the other Surrey villages that I represent will be worse off because of it. Does he not agree with me that the government must write off that legacy debt, or at very least ring-fence it, so that our constituents don't face the penalties for the problems and, to be frank, the absolute mess that was left by other boroughs and their politicians?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's a lot more harder in his language in terms of this issue, and I very much respect him for that. At the very least, I think that we need to have a well thought out plan and strategy in terms of what is going to happen with this block of debt. There's a variety of different options in terms of how it can be managed and how it can be dealt with. What I think is a fundamental problem, and my constituents raising me, and my constituents are really worried about, service providers, be it charities and businesses, are really concerned about, is that decisions which have been made in a neighbouring local authority, which they have had no involvement, no dealing with, are going to have material impact on them when the West Unitary is being set up. And at the moment, I realise the scale of the debt is it's a huge problem to deal with. It's a complicated problem. I don't envy the Minister in terms of coming into this, in terms of trying to find a way through that. What I really wanted to press to her is that we need to have this debate and this discussion around it. I'm glad we've got this forum this afternoon to do so that the West Unitary, but frankly other unitary authorities which are being set up and which there's a problem, can be dealt fairly. We know what's coming down the tracks, and as I say, my residents aren't going to be punished for decisions which have been made in other authorities that they never got the chance to vote for. This is fundamentally unfair. I consider, my constituent. By the way, this isn't something which, in some ways, we're not unused to in my part of Surrey, because we sit in the penumbra, just on the outskirts outside of London, and there are plenty of policies that come from the Mayor of London, it's all from London, which affect us in a whole range of negative ways and that we don't have the ability to vote for. Unfortunately, I think this is far and away the most substantial, and that there is just so much fear and concern and uncertainties in terms of what's going back down, what could be, what we expect to be coming down the track. Now, of course, there's a huge irony in all this, because Surrey is one of the largest contributors to the exchequer in our country. Cutting local authority funding, impacting services, and many contracts local authorities maintain risks serious harm, not only locally in Surrey, but to the national economy. For example, if the government doesn't effectively fund local highways, it will lead to deteriorating road conditions, resulting in more temporary, emergency repair works. We all know the nightmare that causes, which causes delays, costs millions in lost work hours, missed appointments, longer transit times for good, which damages the Surrey economy and by virtue damages the national economy. If the government doesn't effectively fund adult social care, it will cause bed blocking in the hospitals, pressure on health services, impeding effective recovery and care. If the government doesn't effectively fund planning services, it means to lengthy delays in assessing applications for home and businesses, but crucially, risks enabling rogue development, which blights Surrey and other areas. While planning enforcement remains a discretionary service, there is a real risk that this is increasingly seen as a nice-to-have, not essential tool to protect communities, and evidence shows that enforcement rates continue to fall in face of funding pressures, inappropriate development, illegal development, people essentially cocking a snoot at the planning system and building in my constituency and places across the country is a serious problem. Rightly so, my local residents when it happens, are absolutely incensed, and critical to trying to stop this and turning it around is not only stronger powers around enforcement, something I've been campaigning on for years now, but is making sure at the very least we have the resources to do proper planning enforcement. Happy to give way.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving away again. In his area, perhaps as in mine, we've had increased housing targets of up to 150% as a consequence of this government's decision, and I understand their commitment to house building. But that also opens up the floodgates to opportunistic development that is unplanned, and that actually requires incredible expertise in planning departments to ensure that it's appropriate and is then enforced. Those are exactly the kind of services that risk being cut back at just the time that they face the greatest pressure. So does the honourable gentleman again agree with me that we need to have some kind of financial resolution to ensure that these services are continued into the future?
Thank you very much for bringing up the issue about housing targets and planning in terms of local authorities. So my constituency covers the majority of the Runnymede local authority, and I think it's roughly around a third of the Elmbridge local authority. In the Runnymede authority, there is a local plan, so there is no risk of the opportunistic development the member mentions. In the Elmbridge local authority, there isn't a local plan, and so there is opportunistic development. There's applications going in the way which are causing huge amounts of concern to local residents in the Cobham Downside, Stoke Davenham, Knockshott area in particular. And in fact, just at the end of last year, I wrote to the Secretary of State along with councillors from Elmbridge to raise our concerns about the fact that because of local government reorganisation, again, Surrey has found itself stuck in stasis. There is no local plan in Elmbridge. Can that be put together by the time we hit the election of the shadow authorities? Awful name when you think about it in terms of how you're sort of setting things up for, when we're knocking on doors asking for support for the shadow authorities. But but how are they? What are Elmbridge to do? Do my constituents living in the Elmbridge part of my constituency effectively have to wait a year and a half before we have the full authority going, when the shadow authority transfers over, before we can have some sensible progress when it comes to getting plans in place so that we can protect people from opportunistic development. And that's before we even talk about the scale of the housing targets, which are sort of disproportionate in terms of how that's spread. And the question I'm going to ask the Minister a bit later in terms of the absence of a commitment for a Surrey Mayor who would be responsible in part in terms of planning decisions. I mean, I hope members can see from the conversation, it's all a bit of a mess, really in terms of where we're at. And it's my constituents who are and local businesses who are stuck in the middle of it. And in fact, perhaps none more sensitive or concerned or more, there's no topic which I think was more sensitive and concerning is the issue in terms of where we find ourselves with special educational needs provision. We all know the impact of what happens when this isn't fully funded. It's obviously a national issue, but I must say I would really like to welcome the work the County Council has been doing under Councillor Jonathan Huddy to improve transparency and engagement locally. And really turning the dial in terms of what's happening for families and children with special educational needs. But ultimately what's needed is, national changes to services and support and the funding to bring forward delivery. And without the local funding, the opportunities for children to reach their full potentials are limited. It causes something, a term which is coined failure demand, which is when services don't provide what's needed early on, and you end up creating more demand in the system later on, really harming and limiting children, notwithstanding all the pressures on families and siblings, and the schools who are going above and beyond to try and support them. The government knows these risks. I know the Minister, knows and appreciates these risks. I hope they also know it's a false economy to cut costs right now. And the resulting economic and social impact of not funding these essential services will really be calamitous locally. Now, of course, as night follows day, I fully expect the government benches and others will see this as an opportunity to blame the Conservative government. And of course, I totally acknowledge that local government has struggled as a result of difficult financial decisions over the years. But there really is no more capacity for cuts, which is why we need to address this now. And I want to use this debate as a plea to move beyond any sort of blame game and political posturing and to work together to address the real risks that we face and establish a sound financial basis for effective local authority finances. Given the clear risks, more than anything else, we now need certainty. Residents and businesses need to know that they will not be shackled with high costs resulting from other local authorities' poor financial management. Businesses and charities who have contracts and partnerships need certainty over their future. And we all need to know that there will be adequate funding so we all will retain access to essential services local authorities provide. This can't wait until after the May elections. Our voters need to know what authorities they are voting councillors to, clarity over the scope of the powers of the authorities. And this is the Minister's opportunity to answer 1.5 million Surrey resident questions. How will local authority debt be dealt with? Will central government ensure effective funding, or do ministers intend to rely on constant tax rises despite the cost of living pressures? These are council tax rises, these are taxes on working people, as she would, the government I assume would define it. Will we have a mayor in Surrey, and if so, can we have the details? And how can we prevent the long-term risks if government continues to prioritise short-term funding cuts? For once, just for once, would this government put Surrey first?
Yeah.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Honourable Member for Runnymede and Weybridge for opening this debate on the important topic of funding for local government in Surrey, and for the thoughtful, constructive and eloquent way in which he has made his opening remarks. Can I also thank him for acknowledging that we have inherited a very challenging context. I don't intend to do any party political back and forth. The reality is the inheritance was incredibly tough, and we are working at pace to try and rectify this in an impossible context for everyone involved. We share his view that local government is absolutely at the front line of delivering services to the people of this country, and they can only do this when central government works with them in partnership to overcome the shared challenges we face. Indeed, our local government reforms, including funding reforms and reorganisation, will enable local councils that are empowered to deliver local services, equipped to drive economic growth, and equipped to work in the interests of their communities. That is a shared goal, that is a shared priority, and we will work with anyone across any political party in order to deliver that. Let me turn to the local government finance settlement first, and just put on record that this is the most significant move yet to make English local government more sustainable. And that is a core priority against a really tough backdrop that local authorities across the country are having to navigate through. We are delivering a fair funding. We're targeting more money to the areas that need it most through, and then we're putting in place multi-year settlements, first time that we have done this in a decade. This will give councils the certainty to have to make the longer-term calls so that they can take a more preventative approach and do less on crisis management. Now, for the local authority in Surrey, by the end of the multi-year settlement period in 2028-29, the provisional settlement makes available almost £1.5 billion of core spending power. And that is an increase in totality of 7.3% compared to 2024-25. We acknowledge that there has been a cut in the core grant, but as has been the case for the last decade and a half, we look at the totality of core spending power, and it is going up. That does not in any way negate the fact that we know it is a tough context that local government are having to operate in after having to operate in a really tough context the last decade. But we are trying to give sufficient flexibility in the approach that we're taking to enable local authorities to weather that. For the first time since 2013-14, the government is updating the relative needs formula that forms part of how local authorities' funding allocation is calculated. Now, this has involved using more up-to-date data, including the recently published in 2025 indices of multiple deprivation as part of our assessment of needs. And we know that that is leading to a redistribution across the country that is tough for some authorities to absorb, but the principle behind it is the authorities and the communities that have huge levels of need and deprivation, we think it is only right and fair that we target more support to those authorities. I say this as a London constituency MP, where London is taking some of that hit, but we see that as fair across the country. If in the end what we care about is supporting the communities that need that most help. We're also simplifying and consolidating 36 revenue funding streams worth over £56 billion.
Order. I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Minister.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So we are simplifying and consolidating 36 revenue funding streams worth over £56 billion over 3 years. This will provide, we hope, greater flexibility, stability, certainty for local authorities. We recognise that funding reform is just one part of the story, and that's why we're committed to simplifying local government by ending the two-tier system and establishing new single-tier unitary authorities. And the Honourable Member has spoken about this. Again, I think across the House, the end goal that we're trying to get to is consistent. There is common ground there. We want authorities that are sustainable, that are strong, that can deliver for your residents and your constituents. For Surrey, as the Secretary of State has decided, subject to parliamentary approval, that we will move towards the two unitary councils, East and West Surrey. Now, on the question of debt, which was raised and rightly raised, we are very alive to the pressure being faced by the new unitaries because of the historical debt. As the Honourable Gentleman has said, we've announced an unprecedented commitment to repay, in principle, £500 million of Woking Borough's council debt in 26-27. This is the first tranche of support, and we will continue to explore what further debt support is required and how we can work with West Surrey Authority, the new West Surrey Authority, to resolve the debt issue. Because we are very clear that at the heart of this are residents, are people whose our collective responsibility is to ensure that we are delivering for them. And so we are committed to working together to make sure that they are protected, and committed to working together to make sure that they have the quality and level of services that they absolutely deliver.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and from what she's saying, it sounds like that she accepts that the remaining debt is still unsustainable to be dealt with at a local level. Is she teasing us with a future announcement of further monies, or is it more just a general ambition?
I would do no such thing as tease with announcements that sit with the Chancellor. But what I would say is that the thing that we have said to partners on the ground and local authority is that this is a shared problem, and we are committed to working together to find a resolution. We understand the pressure that the historical debt will place on the new authorities, and it is incumbent on all of us to find a way through that ensures that on the other side of it, we have local authorities that are sustainable and that can survive and that can deliver the quality of services for the local residents that's required.
Would you give way? I'm so grateful that she gives way. Just a moment ago, she said that she was working with the West. I think she said she's going to work with the West Surrey Authority in terms of resolving this issue. How does she? At what stage in the process does she anticipate a sort of decision and resolution is going to be made? Because we're not going to have the West Surrey Authority as a operational statutory unit until spring about next year. We've got elections to the shadow authorities this year, and the shadow authorities, as I understand it, won't have any powers until investment date when it's transferred to the full FAT authority. So it's still the current county council and the district boroughs will still have the statutory powers. Is she saying that there's going to be no debt resolution until West Unitary is set up? Is she saying that there will be a resolution when the shadow authority is in place? Or are we going to have a resolution on this before the elections this May? Because I think that's really important for our residents. I think they really need to know what they're voting their councillors to and what setup they're going to have to deal with. Could she say today, even that it's her, that she can guarantee, or it's her ambition to get this resolved before we get to those elections?
Minister.
Well, we are already working with all the authorities involved. That is why, for example, we put in place the 500 million to work in authority. We will continue working. We've been doing that. Historically, we'll continue working with them in order to resolve this. I can't give a time frame, in part because it requires all parts of us to come together to understand the scale of the problem, but critically how we can work together and the levers that are available to us. But what I hope he will hear is that there is a shared commitment to resolving this, and we will make sure that we're working with the constituent local authorities to get to a resolution. I'll make a little bit of progress if I may. And look, I just want to also acknowledge that we know the pressure that social care is creating on local government finance system, and that this is squeezing vital services. The Honourable gentleman raised the issue of planning, but we're seeing it across services that are not non-statutory. And ultimately, if we come back to the core thing that local government can deliver are effective services that hold and build our communities together, and we all want to make sure that that is preserved. And that is why we are driving through some pretty punchy reforms across, for example, children's social care, the biggest transformation in a generation, with a historic 2.4 billion of investment over the multi-year settlement period into family partnership programmes. That's why we're building a national care service based on quality care, backed by 4.6 billion of additional funding available for adult social care, compared in 2028-29 compared to 25-26. And for SEND, special education needs and disabilities, we will bring forward a full white paper, because we understand that there is a pressure, we understand the impact it's having on local government finances, and we know that we must find a way through in order to make sure that we are delivering the best possible services for children and families that need that support, but doing it in a sustainable way. I will give way briefly.
I am terribly grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, who has been extremely open in her responses so far. One of the side effects of the financial pressures that Surrey is facing as a consequence of special educational needs is the so-called safety valve agreement. And one of the consequences of that is a proposed school in my constituency called Frimley Oak Academy, which has the money designated to it. The DFE agree that it should go ahead, but because of the safety valve agreement, Surrey is not able to go ahead because of the ongoing operational costs of that school. It's an example of where the financial constrictions are having a material effect on the provision of a really vital educational offering. Could I perhaps ask the Minister to take that point away and inquire about whether that could be freed up to ensure that this school can come to my constituency?
I'm very happy to take that point away, and we will write back either from my department or from the DFE in order to provide an answer. Let me just end finally by addressing the question that was raised about devolution and the devolution process and the move towards a mayor. We are absolutely committed to devolution. I have spoken to the leader of Surrey, where I've made very clear that we want to move forward. The first step for us is creating a strong strategic authority that is empowered to start driving economic change, that can bring constituent authorities together to make strategic decision making, and we want to move forward with that at pace. So we will work with the new unitaries, we will work with partners on the ground to make sure that we are building that strong economic footprint, building the institution that allows us to move to the next stage of devolution. And to sort of conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just thank... Yes.
She's being extraordinarily generous, and I just don't want her to have missed the very important question from my honourable friend from Runnymede and Weybridge, which was about a Surrey mayor. Can she confirm whether or not here today in this chamber we will be getting a mayor in Surrey before the end of this parliamentary term?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So ultimately, that will be a question locally. The process is always to put in place a combined authority first and foremost and get that working. For my many years of working in the space of devolution, the big lesson that I've learnt, and we look across the Greater Manchester combined authorities, that if we get that strong institution working in partnership first and foremost, able to hold power and deliver economic development functions, it makes the mayor far, far stronger and more effective. And so the first stage for us is working with the constituent authorities to move forward with that strategic authority. We want to do that with pace. We want to make sure that we are equipping it with the powers that it needs so that it can start driving economic prosperity for the area, so it can take on strategic planning powers, so it can take on transport powers, so it can start investing in the local community, and then we can then move through the stages of devolution. But the commitment for devolution, Surrey, is absolutely there, and we will work with partners in order to deliver that. Can I thank all the honourable members for the points that they have raised, for their passion, their commitment, their advocacy for Surrey, and the powerful points that they have made. I hope they have heard through this debate that we as a government are absolutely committed to fixing the foundations of local government finance against an incredibly difficult backdrop. We are ready to listen to concerns of any local authority about the reforms that are ongoing. We know they are difficult, we know they are punchy, we are doing them because we think it is necessary if we're to get local government back on a sustainable footing, but we are determined to work together across party lines in order to make sure we're delivering our shared goal, which is services that work for constituents in every part of this country, and the government is absolutely committed to that.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Order, order. You need to stand up. Stand up.